My name is Greg Kervil. I'm an undiagnosed dyslexic, and I'm best known for my work as an international consultant and author in regulatory compliance and product safety. Why are we here, and what are we looking for? Curiosity? To find out what's new, or to find answers to specific questions? Any of these answers is fine, and I thank you for your time. Here are a few facts about me. I am an undiagnosed dyslexic. I still don't know my alphabet. I did not realize I was dyslexic until I was 50 years old, and I have written several dozen books and was commissioned by Elsevier, one of the largest publishers of scientific literature. Dyslexia: The Brighter Side is my 70-year-old story from being a frightened schoolboy to becoming an international consultant, presenter, and published author. It is also my first non-technical publication. Why isn't the title My First 50 Years? It was only when I became aware of my dyslexia that I could identify the limitations it had imposed upon me. But most importantly, only then did I realize I had relied on the power that dyslexia gave me to develop the workabouts that helped me in my daily life. My research into dyslexia and identifying my workabouts took many years. So watch this space, there's still a long way to go. What's with the strange font? Our brains sometimes do funny things with letters such as B, D, E, P, and Q, which we get confused. The open dyslexic fonts help prevent some of these things from happening. Letters with heavily weighted bottoms indicate orientation and make it difficult to confuse letters which dyslexics traditionally have problems. The font also helps reinforce the line of text and stop the reader scanning the lines above and below. Unique unsymmetrical shapes of each letters help prevent switching and flipping. The italic style for open dyslexic is designed to provide emphasis without compromising readability. https opendyslexic.org. My pet peeve. There are dyslexics and there are non-dyslexics, or non-Ds. I have no problem being called a dyslexic, but I do have a problem when non-dyslexics, non-Ds, want everyone to call them normal. For me, that is a serious problem because it implies that we dyslexics are not normal. Throughout my writing, I used the word non-D, plural non-Ds, to describe our non-dyslexic cousins and encourage all dyslexics to do the same. Non-dyslexic, non-D, and the plural non-dyslexics, non-Ds. Dyslexics, our place in the world. Here are a few counterintuitive facts. Only 20% of the population is dyslexic. It has been reported that dyslexics are responsible for 90% of all innovation, and 40% of billionaires are dyslexic. If true, then dyslexics are responsible for a huge part of our economy. Consider the financial impact in terms of the return on investment and the potential gains if help to dyslexics was better funded. Dyslexics, our place in the nation. A white paper published by Boston Consulting Group, July 2020, concerning dyslexia in California. Dyslexia is $1 trillion problem we don't know we have. Its consequences are estimated to cost California approximately $12 billion in 2020 and $1 trillion over the next 60 years. Ballparking those numbers, 60 years is approximately, and 50 states, that comes out as around $1 trillion per year nationwide. The report also continues, this is preventable. Investing in early screening and teacher training would provide a return on investment of between 800 and 2,000%. As if that wasn't enough, dyslexia is also mentioned by the Department of Homeland Security Threat Assessment Center in the U.S. Secret Service analysis of targeted school violence. This clearly implies dyslexia is a huge financial problem, a debilitating personal issue, and a major epidemic that affects our entire society. Problems and the education industry. 1. It is natural for us all to make life easy, and teachers are no exception. One of the time-saving techniques to make sure that everyone is listening and learning a lesson is to pick one student and get them to read from a book. This is great for the teacher because it saves them time, lets them focus on the class, and for the good student it's a way to show their mastery and why they deserve extra marks. To a dyslexic, it is like standing on a 10-meter high diving board with chains holding our arms and feet, and knowing that with each passing moment we are shuffling inexorably towards the edge of that board. Most dyslexics have experienced this feeling of helplessness where we are about to plunge into a zone in which we have no chance of surviving. Every second that passes is nothing short of cruel and unusual punishment, and is something that only a dyslexic who has suffered the full and abject horror of this treatment at school can ever appreciate. Problems and the education industry. 2. This is but one example facing the non-Ds versus dyslexic divide. There are hundreds of others. We know that dyslexics have incredible skills identifying the root of a problem and in problem solving. This is why the first step must be to include dyslexics in the education system. Yet those in authority have either not researched the facts, ignored the evidence, or more likely, judged that few dyslexics have teaching experience and therefore cannot contribute. But teachers don't have dyslexic experience, so why are they able to contribute? I doubt that few teachers have ever experienced the same feeling of terror as the dyslexics that they have taught. How then can non-Ds apply the correct weighting to the suffering of dyslexics? Problems and the education industry. 3. The problems and symptoms cannot be studied from a book. The only people competent to perform this task will have an advanced degree in psychology, specializing in dyslexia, or, dare I suggest, someone who has lived their life as a dyslexic. Most dyslexics know how and where the education industry failed them, and what simple actions would prevent cruel and unusual punishment being sanctioned against future generations. Most people would laugh at the lunacy of giving an 8-year-old English student extra time to translate a story from Latin into German. The idea of giving a student extra time to carry out an impossible task is crazy. Then why is giving a dyslexic extra time logical? Is it a pretense that traditional educationalists have a scientific understanding of dyslexia and can accurately quantify its effect? Finally, dyslexia was first documented in the British Medical Journal in 1896. Clinical research is ongoing. Are teachers best equipped to carry the solution forward? One minority group often mentioned with dyslexia are twice exceptional students. 2E students are considered exceptional both because of their giftedness and because they are also disabled. TUI students represent between 2% and 5%, whereas dyslexics represent about 20% of the population. Most people have abilities that are ranked within the normal distribution bell curve. The abilities and disabilities of TUI individuals are 2 or more outliers that are well outside the normal curve. Dyslexics may have only one outlier. How do I know I'm dyslexic? My wife's younger son was tested and diagnosed as dyslexic. She recognized I had many of the same symptoms. I've also taken many of the online tests and possess more than 80% of the characteristics of a dyslexic. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and swims like a duck, then it probably is a duck. How was my early school life? In my book I wrote, "Dyslexic children know they are different. Every day they meet other children and their feelings of isolation are reinforced, but they cannot see nor can they understand why they are different and treated as pariahs. Their frustration is compounded because dyslexia has changed how they see the world, and they do not have the words to explain their feelings to those near them. The parents of a dyslexic child are now faced with a distressed child who is frustrated, acts up, or misbehaves at school because of the frustration caused by conditions over which they have absolutely and utterly no control. The problems are at many levels, all of which leave the dyslexic child feeling their situation is helpless. I wrote that from the heart and from my bitter experience." Reading aloud. I still have cold sweats when I think of the times I had to stand up and read aloud. My words would be garbled and sometimes out of order. Even common words would come out wrong. Next, my breathing would fail. I seldom got to the first full stop period without gasping for breath. I could feel my cheeks reddening and getting hot and cold chills up and down my back. I began to shiver uncontrollably. The ringing in my ears would eventually be blanked out by the jeers from my classmates. My vision changed until I seemed to be looking down the wrong end of a pair of binoculars. I felt faint and desperately tried not to pass water. Why did I drop out of university 2/3 of my way through a BSc honours course in applied physics? It took me more than 40 years to realize the problem. I never learned how to study. I never needed to revise or SWOT for tests. This was a serious problem because I never learned how to revise, or in that pre-internet world, how to use a library for research. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I had no way to prepare myself for that unknown. Do dyslexics have good memories? This is a really important question for dyslexics. The answer is I don't know, because I have no way of knowing what is normal anyhow. However, I can remember conversations from years ago, word for word. My wife describes this as scary. I try to answer the question in my book by relating stories from when I was 3 years old, from 70 years back, from literature and math I learned up to 19, or work experiences from my 20s, which is 50 years ago. Maybe that helps. Can dyslexics write? Dyslexics can do anything, provided we must define what it is we're supposed to do. A lot of people miss this simple and obvious step, and we must have the right motivation and or the right trigger. First of all, it's impossible to do anything if you don't know what it is. With the right motivation, well, what do I mean by right? Motivation is personal and is driven by circumstances. It depends on the person, the situation, and the moment. It's generally driven by the question, what's in it for me? WIIFM, where me means the dyslexic, not the teacher, and not in response to a threat or a bribe. That's me, myself, not you. This can be a real big issue when trying to motivate a dyslexic. It's also important to remember the right trigger. This may or may not be necessary. For me, it was being downsized and needing a reliable source of income. Some years ago, I needed to create a bibliography of my published works. My first published material dated from 1975, when I was 26 years old. That is probably a long time to be first published and begs several questions. Why did it take so long? What started my writing career? And why did I continue to write? Why did it take so long? And why did I write? I guess my answer is having a reason and an opportunity. When I started work as a circuit designer, I applied to half a dozen or so trade magazines. Every month I received these magazines. Several of them included circuit ideas, and I noticed that a few names appeared regularly, and the circuits I routinely created were on a par, complexity and originality, with the ones that got published. At that time, the magazine paid between $50 and $100 for each circuit they published, and in the 70s, that's what I earned in a month. Why did I continue writing? It also felt good to see my name in print. Published circuit ideas paid between $50 and $100, which was nearly a month's pay. Writing was hard work, but then there was a high reward in doing it. Dollars, resume, recognition. Writing now passed the what's in it for me test. But I've just skipped 20 plus years, so let me get back to my first days at school. My first day at school. I started school 3 months after my 5th birthday. The teacher told me to sit where I wanted, so I sat where I felt comfortable and safe, like at home. I sat on the floor. She obviously didn't like my choice, so she raised her voice, "Sit on the chair or stand outside the class." She was not friendly. As an only child, I'd never been spoken to like that. I didn't like it there, and she gave me a way out, to stand outside the class. So I stood up, walked outside the class to a riot of cheers. That is my recollection of my first day at school, age 5. I never did understand why she gave me choices and then punished me because she didn't like the choice I made. It just wasn't logical. With hindsight, had she left me sitting on the floor and then continued with the class, I would eventually have sat on the chair so I could see what was going on. Maybe she was new. She was definitely a control freak. Learning to spell. My parents started teaching me phonics, which was how they learned to spell. Phonics made sense. It gave me a link between the image of a letter and how it sounded in a word. Dyslexics like links, and I make a great point of links throughout my book and my presentations. At school we were taught spelling by the long discredited method of spelling by rote. Everything in the class had a sign with its name printed in neat letters, D-O-O-R. Rote did not help me. It did not give me any link between the sound and shape of the letters, and forced me to try to remember a letter and a sound with nothing linking the two. Dyslexics are good at linking things. Over the next 40 years, I taught myself to spell using phonics. Spelling by guess the letter. We were taught spelling in a truly bizarre way. The teacher wrote a word like owl on our green blackboard, pointed to it and read each letter, O-W-L. She then erased each letter. There were no phonics, just the name of each letter. Then she drew 3 dashes where the 3 letters had been and asked the class to guess one of the missing letters. For me, links were essential. Once a letter was erased, it was gone. I had no memory of it. There was no sound, no image or any link that would give me a clue of what had been there and what was missing. Our teacher looked at me and asked me what letter was missing. Why, I answered, perhaps more in question than in answer. Not for the first time that day I was told I was 15 shades of stupid, which sums up my experience at school until I was about 11. Motivators. It is always important to consider the risk and cost of failure against the benefit and reward of success. This may keep progress to small steps, but will help minimize the risk of major setbacks that could impact your progress. Simplistically, you need a reason to take each step forward. Better still, several reasons. These could be to prove something to yourself, money, fame. Being published can be a good thing. It is a simple, potentially easy, low-risk way of achieving status in a crowd. There is no risk because if you're not published, no one will ever know unless you tell them. To make a big thing about your success can get you labeled as boastful or conceited. One way to avoid this is to get some third party, like a magazine, to publish your success. This way it is an independent third party that is telling the world how good you are. So how did I develop my writing? Very slowly. As I got better jobs, I needed to write processes that instructed managers, engineers, designers, and others how to do their jobs. At this time, there were no word processors. Secretaries were the only ones with typewriters. They would take my handwritten notes, correct my spelling, grammar, and other errors, and produce beautiful typed versions of what I had meant to say. Identify available resources. Secretaries, anyone except your boss, who will proofread for you. Read at home. Use speech-to-text software and text-to-speech software. My working and writing. I was working on a surface-to-air missile project and employed by Marconi. We employed several hundred engineers and designers and were subcontracted to British Aerospace. I was responsible for general engineering, quality and reliability. I had about a dozen people reporting to me and a budget of about $3 million. I wrote documentation that controlled all documentation from the top-level design requirements from the customer down to the documentation necessary to change the color of paint. To misquote Tolkien's Ring of Power, one document to rule them all and in the darkness bind them. One of my tasks was to define what engineers would do, how they would complete each task, and how they would document any change they made. We employed about 300 people on that project who immediately hated me because my appointment prevented them from making changes on an ad lib basis. The mass of paperwork was enormous. Then I was appointed minute secretary to the quarterly technical progress meetings with British Aerospace. The prime contractor, and 7 contractors, of whom Marconi was one. The minute secretary needed a working knowledge of electronics, electrical, hydraulic power and control, thermal cooling, hydraulic systems, radar, microwave, signal processing, computing systems, system engineering plus operations management, and the ability to read and create PERT diagrams. Somehow somebody considered that the person best suited for this task was a dyslexic who couldn't spell and didn't know his alphabet. Mind maps replace writing. Mind maps are a great tool to replace what you hear with a visual image of the word. This diagram is my record of a 90-minute presentation of a talk on marketing and branding. It illustrates how much more effective mind maps are at recording information than traditional note-taking or even shorthand. I started in the middle of the page with the word Twitter, which was the source, and worked outwards, showing the flow of ideas with arrows and developing ideas and topics using other symbols, circles and shapes. These identify actions and decisions. Use symbols that make sense to you. It is a map of your mind, so you are free to make up the rules as you go along. Using a whole sheet of paper and starting in the middle is key. You're creating a mental image of the ideas being conveyed and the concepts being described. Occasionally I include quotes of what was said, but generally the image I've created will be strong enough to unlock minute details tucked away in my brain days, weeks, or even years later. I have downloaded and experimented with several mind map programs and applications, but I did not find any one that I can recommend it. I have incorporated the best ideas from several of them. For me, a pencil and paper, plus a lot of practice, wins every time. It is cheap and completely within your control. Construction of the mind maps work best when they are unique to us. Only then will creating a mind map become intuitive. Trying to remember somebody else's construction and protocols slows the progress terribly. You are the only person that needs to read your mind maps, so make it your own. Trigger points. 1. During 2014, I was ranked #1 international Amazon best-selling author. I laughed for days afterwards, thinking how the Reverend Brother Bonaventure, one of my English teachers, would be rotating in his grave after I received that accolade. I don't know what he would have done when I was awarded 2 gold medals for literature by our county during the senior games. I believe that my late in-life successes raise several fundamental questions for dyslexics to ponder, and perhaps ram down the throat of the few educationalists who make it their mission to teach dyslexics how to become inferior versions of themselves. Before they continue to tell dyslexics how we must change, educationalists need to answer the following questions. Did I always have the ability to write? If not, when did I learn? Do all dyslexics have this ability to write? What triggered my ability to write? Why did educationalists fail to trigger my proven ability to write, and yet continue to tell me it's my fault? Could it be that we dyslexics lose our confidence after many years of being downtrodden? Is it possible that all dyslexics can write, can become well-known and highly paid consultants, can become successful in other ways, have allowed ourselves to be conditioned and to set our expectations too low? Trigger points 2. My personal trigger point was when I became unemployed. I was faced with taking a job that paid between $50,000 and $80,000 less than I had been earning. trying to find another high-paying job, or doing something radical. After 6 months, I finally realized there were neither high nor low-paying jobs, so I opted for something radical. I reasoned that I had been trained to be one of the leading experts in electrical product safety, CE marking, and had knowledge every manufacturer would require during the next 3 years. Therefore, if I could not find a full-time job, I should be able to find several companies that would employ me on a short-term basis. Thus, GK Consultants was formed. I analysed my weaknesses, and top of the list was my inability or fear to make cold calls to strangers. Turning weaknesses into strengths. I am a great believer in serendipity. The newspaper I picked up and read had a large advertisement by an insurance company seeking agents and offering free training. It's payback time, I thought, for all those phone calls that interrupted my peace and quiet by insurance companies that wanted my money. So I signed up and I got the best free training targeted for my specific needs. I learned how to prepare call logs, messages, and follow-up. Marketing, sales, and search engine optimization. By early 1994, I launched my first website. I was so far ahead of the curve that I was able to purchase the 4-letter URL gkcl.com. I was then 45 years old and had never made a sales call. Worse, I knew nothing about how to sell, but I did understand marketing and IT. My strategy was simple. I contributed hundreds of hours answering questions posted on user groups that asked product safety and regulatory compliance questions raised by designers and engineers. Answering those questions fueled my transition from a high-paid dyslexic engineer who was afraid of giving presentations to becoming a well-paid, published, and much respected international engineering consultant. My answers were the beginning of my first and most profitable book, The Practical Guide to Electrical Product Safety. One weird thing about dyslexics is that we can be both messy and neat freaks both at the same time. It just depends on the situation. When I am storing or organizing things in 3-dimensional space, I spread things out as far as I can in all directions, and when I have exhausted all reasonably accessible horizontal surfaces, I create piles. I accept that I am messy and without apparent order, but I'll be able to find anything in that mess within a few seconds. My desk looks like a mess, but I can pick up any one of the 50 items hiding there without a moment's hesitation. Mess and finding stuff. When I no longer have 3 degrees of freedom and limited to 2 dimensions, like working with an index, a list of contents, or filing on a computer, that's when I become a neat freak. I have no explanation for why this happens. It's automatic. I noticed it first in '93 when I was downsized for the 3rd time and formed my consulting company. It was logical to stop working with pencil and paper and to go fully computerized. Email had been my primary method of communication since 1988, so it was an easy transition. Some of my files were large, hundreds of kilobytes, in the days when the largest disk drive was 10 megabytes. But the size of the hard drive was never an issue. It was the number of files, the file structure, and being able to find anything after saving it. In the first year, I had only 30 customers, but I had thousands of files that had to be organized into hundreds of topics. Finding specific data in all these files was critical to my consulting business and writing technical articles. Dyslexia, the mother of invention. In my 2nd year of consultancy, I had a one-man office with 2 computers. One was a server with a color A4 letter size and color A3 poster size printer, a scanner, and a CD burner with several large internal disk drives. My computer setup was quite cutting edge for 1995, and I had created one of the first Windows-based network accessible storage systems, NAS. It was not until 2003 that Windows announced its NAS systems, nearly 10 years after I had created one. Another illustration of how dyslexics are driven by their circumstances to become innovators. Dyslexia, water lilies and letters. In 1990, I visited Paris for a few days. It was the same weekend as Princess Diana's fateful car crash. In my mind, those events are linked, and I cannot think of that tragedy without thinking of the water lilies, or revelation that came to me during that visit. One of the highlights was visiting the Musée des Arts in Paris, France, where I saw Monet's The Water Lilies for the first time. Like everyone, I had seen many posters of the water lilies created by Monet, but this was the first time I had seen the whole of the water lily pond. I want to share my revelation, so I need you to see the painting as I saw them. The water lily pond. What does Monet's water lily pond have to do with dyslexia? Everything. As you enter the room and move to the centre, you see the painting through the eyes of a frog sitting on a lily pad. As you turn 360 degrees, you see the pond at dawn, midday, afternoon, and dusk. The water lily pond. Every section of the painting contains a group of lilies. Each group is different, like the letters in a word and the words on a page. The water lily pond. The entire lily pond can be reduced to small pieces containing a single lily or a cluster of lilies that, if we show any one of those images to a handful of people, someone will instantly identify it as the lily pond. It's not that we are all so familiar with every frame of his work. Only those that have visited the museum will have seen them all. It's also true that few of us have studied Monet's work to the point that we can recognize his style. Consider each lily to be a letter of the alphabet. I want you to look at each of the smaller images and think of each lily as if it was a letter of the alphabet. Look at one lily. You choose this lily to represent the letter T. Now let's look at the symbols used by our computers. How can we recognize the work from just a fraction of one frame? And could it explain why dyslexics have such a hard time? How many T's are there? Here are the characters in the character map. There are about 7 characters identified by T. Now think of how a non-D and a dyslexic person might interpret the same Unicode map. The non-D may identify the 7 characters correctly as a letter T, but the dyslexic will see 70 or more characters as if they were a T. It doesn't matter how long it takes for the non-D to process the information, but it's a safe bet that a dyslexic will take 70 divided by 7 10 times longer than the non-D. It is also probable that the dyslexic will make 10 times more mistakes. If we just base our calculations on the difference as perceived by the non-D and the dyslexic, could this difference be how dyslexics and non-Ds perceive the images of letters differently? Could it explain how dyslexics have become separated by our different perception of symbols, speech to text and text to speech? There are many more alternative reasons that can explain why dyslexics have such a hard time, like taking 10 times longer to do a simple task. Back in the early 90s, I bought the IBM dictation system. I thought the best way to check the text was to convert it back to speech. That was terribly wrong. It doubled the time I took to listen to the text to speech, and the resultant boredom increased my errors. The problem facing us is that the more perfect speech-to-text systems become, the more we rely on them, and the more certain we are to make errors. My conclusion after spending several $1,000s on hardware was that errors are our friend. They keep us awake and on our toes, provided we don't have too many of them. Plan to fail. Errors are our friend. Artificial intelligence is making huge improvements in speech-to-text software. But the truth is that the better and more perfect STT software becomes, the greater the risk that some fundamental error will slip in during our proofreading with catastrophic results. Layer 1. For more than 5 years I have used Dragon. That's okay. Therefore, there's no need to change. There's no point in using text to speech here because I'd need to listen to everything 2 or 3 times. Layer 2. It's more efficient to use a grammar checker at layer 2 to identify spelling and other errors. I use the free version of Grammarly. I did try with the pro version, but it started trying to change my style and slowed me down, so I've reverted to the free basic version of Grammarly. Layer 3. I use Windows Speak or the downloaded Concise English Oxford Dictionary when I need to decide if I mean choose, chose, or choice. There are also open source variants on https sourceforge.net, which has software options for every purse.